required for the Philippines to transition from tech for growth to tech for good. Following the research presentation, there will be a panel discussion featuring digital economy experts from relevant industries. Together, they will work to identify timely and actionable policy recommendations that can expand the desired outcomes for the digital economy. Before we start, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everybody that the event will be photographed and videographed. Tech for Good Institute uses photos, videos, and stories to amplify our publicity efforts for the Institute. The communications platforms include websites, social media, printed collateral, among others. The photos, videos, and stories may also be shared with third-party stakeholders, such as ministries and statutory boards, industry partners, other institutions of higher learning and media for their communications materials on Tech for Good Institute. If you happen to have any questions, concerns, you might direct them, please, to the technical assistants of the event who are stationed in the event venue. Thank you. Now, with regard to data privacy, the organizers, the Tech for Good Institute and the Asian Institute of Management strive to ensure a high level of security for your personal data. The organizers will comply with the Philippines Data Privacy Act governing data that was gathered as part of the registration process during this event and the evaluation. Ladies and gentlemen, to kick off our program today, I would like to invite Professor Jamil Paulo S. Francisco, Executive Director of Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness, to give the opening remarks. Let's give him a big round of applause, please.
Good morning. Welcome to AIM. It is an honor for me to welcome, of course, our esteemed keynote speaker, Senator Grace Poe, and all of our distinguished guests as well. The RSN Policy Center back in 2019 conducted a study on the risk of automation among Filipino workers due to the fourth industrial revolution. And in that study from 2019, we concluded that 67% of Filipino workers face the risk of automation based on technologies that were available back then. I recall that there were two kinds of reactions that we'd get from audiences like this whenever we presented the results of that study. One reaction among the relatively larger group would be a worried look. They would ask us how to defend themselves against automation. Of course, being tied to an education institution, we were proud to show the results that said that with higher education, there was a smaller likelihood of automation. But in the same study, we found that even those that graduated from college had a 46% chance of being automated. So that group would be frantically asking questions about how to automation-proof and future-proof their jobs, what 21st century skills they would need. The other group would be a little bit more acrimonious in a sense that they would ask us about our methodologies, about how we gather these probabilities, about whether technical probability and technical possibility was the same as economic feasibility, and the answer is probably not. Well, that was in 2019. Of course, fast forward to 2023, a lot of the things that we imagined might happen have actually started to happen in the realms of e-commerce, in terms of artificial intelligence. In fact, at the beginning of this year, something became very popular that shook our industry in academia and higher education. First, you might know this to be ChatGPT. I recall some conversations with some of my colleagues and some professors from other universities talking about what we should do to prevent the use of GPT. How do we make sure that our students don't cheat by using GPT? And it's funny because it reminded me of what happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago back in high school, or maybe a little bit more than 4 or 5 years ago. I remember it was my senior year, and we had a history class. Our professor, the teacher at history class, asked us to write a research report on I think some sort of parallelism between the Philippine War of Independence and the Peloponnesian War in Greece. And I remember on top of his, is it called a manila paper, those brown pieces of paper
Yeah.
where you had instructions? It said, write big words there. It said, do not use internet sources. And this was a pretty okay school, I think, that I went to. Of course, fast forward to 2023, that statement is just virtually unimaginable. In a few months ago, a study by the US National Bureau of Economic Research had put out a paper by researchers from MIT Sloan as well as Stanford University, looking at how the use of GPT among customer service agents in the BPO industry, many from the Philippines, actually affected their productivity. And according to that report, productivity among the BPO workers went up by almost 14%. They were able to handle more calls per hour, and more calls were considered or tagged as resolved. Among the lower skilled workers or the new hires, productivity actually went up by as much as 35%. Now, for a country like ours that unfortunately ranked 60th out of 64th in terms of labor productivity in the World Competitiveness Yearbook, of which we are a partner with, shameless plug, again, as a doomsayer, any productivity gain is important. And for me, that shed light into how we should approach technologies. Conversations like what we're about to have this morning are important because developing countries like ours need to adopt the new technologies of the fourth industrial revolution in order to catch up with the more developed countries. But it's also important because we need to adapt the technologies for our very specific labor abundant context as an emerging country. In these conversations, it's important to have regional partners like TFGI so we can learn from best practice and from expertise coming from different countries abroad. But we also need to take on a regional perspective because for a win-win situation to really come from this use of new technologies, we need to find different perspectives to be able to help as many of our people as possible. I look forward to the presentation that I believe Mr. Keith Detros would also be providing today and the conversations that will take place. Again, welcome to AIM.
Thank you very much, Professor Jamil Paulo Francisco, Executive Director of Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness. And now to deliver her opening remarks, it is my honor to call Dr. Ming Tan, Founding Executive Director of the Tech for Good Institute. Let's give a big round of applause to Dr. Ming Tan.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Jamu, for your very warm welcome. Senator Grace Poe, Tech for Good Advisor, Anton Paraket, AIM President and Dean, Dr. Jikyong Kang, distinguished partners from the private, public, and civil sectors, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Tech for Good Institute and our co-organizer, the AIM Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness, I would like to extend our warmest welcome to everyone at our research presentation and dialogue, From Promise to Progress, Unlocking Quality Digital Economy Growth in the Philippines. Thank you for spending your morning with us. Let me first speak very briefly about the Tech for Good Institute. We are a non-profit entity, seed funded by GRAB. We're delighted to have Ms. Grace Veracruz and a couple of other GRAB colleagues and GRAB alum, I think, as well, here today. And as our institute's name suggests, we focus on issues at the intersection of technology, society, and the economy. Our mission is to contribute to the development, adoption, and governance of technology and technology-enabled business models so that the potential for technology may be leveraged to advance inclusive, sustainable, and equitable growth for Southeast Asia. Our event here is actually a celebration of only our second anniversary. Last year, we celebrated our first birthday in Jakarta with an ASEAN event. And we are absolutely delighted to be celebrating this milestone here in the Philippines with you. Central to achieving our mission is to encourage conversations across the entire ecosystem, everyone working in, and as Jamu mentioned, impacted by Southeast Asia's fast-growing digital economy. So this includes stakeholders like all of you who share this vision of a thriving and innovative Southeast Asia for all. As I mentioned, we were only founded 2 years ago in response to the growth of Southeast Asia's digital economy and increasing digitalization of society as well. Our region's digital economy is expected to hit $1 trillion by 2030, with 460 million users connected to the internet. And yet, 100 million of these 460 million users only came online in the last 3 years. And these recent adopters are mobile natives. Their use of technology is very different. I don't know about you, but I remember using a desktop. I don't know, they're not using desktop or laptops. They are straight online on the mobile phone. The region's mobile penetration rate is the 3rd highest in the world at 132%. So technology and digital technology in particular has the potential to drive economic growth, but we've also seen how its impact is cultural, is social, and is political. So at the Tech for Good Institute, we believe that society can and must shape the trajectory of technological innovation. It is people who decide where funding goes. It is people who decide how to govern and regulate tech. It is people, consumers, who decide what services to consume. And so even as our region is poised for growth, we have to ask, what sort of growth is it that we want to achieve? What do we as a society value? So we believe that when impact is the driving purpose of technology, there is a lot of scope to align innovation with the developmental goals of the country. In our presentation today, we will share key findings of what digital economy stakeholders envision for the next stage of digital transformation, both in their own countries and for the whole region. As a nonprofit serving 6 Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, we hope that a regional perspective is helpful to complement the local expertise that we have in this room today. At the same time, part of our role is to constantly reiterate to the rest of the world how Southeast Asia is different. We are a diverse market. We may have a population twice the size of the United States. Sounds like a very attractive market, but we comprise over 1,000 ethnic groups. We speak over 1,000 languages and dialects here. And in addition, each Southeast Asian country is developing at its own pace and developing according to its own agenda. So the understanding of how the digital economy works needs a nuanced and localized approach. So as an institute, we advocate for fit-for-purpose policies instead of one-size-fits-all solutions. We recognize that technologies and corresponding regulations must be responsive to the local context, respectful of local norms, and take into consideration cultural sensitivities. So this is where partnerships are so important. Local experts are well placed to answer questions that are just as important. What policies should be in place to act as key enablers that actually work? Implementation is super important. So we're very grateful to AIM for their continued partnership and to our panel of representatives from the government, industry, and innovation ecosystem who will participate in our panel later. We are not an academic institution like AIM, so research is important to deliver insights and recommendations, but also to catalyze further conversation and discussion. So I'm really looking forward that we will be able to contextualize the discussion for actionable, timely, and relevant recommendations that make sense for the Philippines. In closing, this event is just the start of a conversation we hope to continue with each and every one of you. Thank you again for spending your morning with us, and I look forward to working with you so that the potential of technology can realize a more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ming Tan, founding executive director of Tech for Good Institute. We'll have again Dr. Ming Tan later to moderate our panel discussion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are very privileged today to have Senator Grace Poe deliver the keynote address. Senator Grace Poe has emerged as a dedicated champion of inclusive and enduring digital evolution within the Philippines. She has initiated conversations about the imperative to revamp the nation's educational framework, prioritizing digital inclusion. Her vision is grounded in the belief that for the Philippines to foster globally competitive and skilled Filipino students, it is essential for them to transition from being mere technology consumers to becoming technology creators. Moreover, in her recent role as the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Public Services, Senator Poe has advocated for increased government investment in digital infrastructure. This advocacy is driven by the recognition of the profound significance of closing the digital divide, particularly in the context of the nation's recovery from the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Grace Poe, Senator of the Republic of the Philippines.
Ms. Grace Vera Cruz, Mr. John Rubio, Mr. Winsley Bangit, Mr. Prim Paipon, Mr. Jik Yung Kang, Dr. Ming Tan, Mr. Anton Periquet. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Good morning. First and foremost, I would like to thank Tech for Good for hosting this conference. It's well known that the government is usually behind the curve when it comes to technology. So gatherings like this are important so that it can improve the low intelligent quotient of policy makers, including me. So now I was asked to talk about the digital economy, the Philippines, and the path we must take to maximize its potential for social inclusion. Just over 3 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic led to a social disruption of historic proportions. Harsh lockdowns were a bitter but necessary inoculation against the virus. It was a difficult adjustment, but the internet helped us bridge those troubled waters. We learned to work from home and to shop from home as well. As a result, the proportion of Filipinos who shopped online increased from 60% in 2019 to more than 80% in 2021. The internet and its related technologies have remained a key part of our post-pandemic reality. Digital technology and the business models it enables now define our lives and the choices we make. Today, one can swipe right to choose tonight's date, click left to buy the dress to wear, and pay for dinner without even reaching for one's wallet. According to a study by Google and Temasek as well as Bain, the Philippine digital economy moved $20 billion worth of merchandise in 2022. And in 2019, 7 billion. So that's quite a big jump. The Bangko Sentral estimates that monthly digital payment transactions have grown fourfold from 523 million transactions, these are transactions in 2019, to 2.04 billion last year. Never has spending tomorrow's income been easier. But technology should go beyond wallet applications. In fact, tech must contribute to social reform. It must address the inequity of our systems and reevaluate traditional ways of doing things. For digital growth without digital inclusion will only deepen the social divide. It was also the pandemic which revealed the depths of the digital divide. We saw this in the students who struggled to keep up, who didn't have their own laptops, who depended on modules, and the employees who struggled to stay online. I actually had to work from home, and very important pieces of legislation were passed during the pandemic. But even my signal was quite bad at home. And especially so when we were investigating the telco companies. So I wonder if that's actually intended. And beyond the parade of euphoric digital statistics, one tragic fact remains. As many as 80% of households are still waiting for an internet connection in the Philippines. The challenge, therefore, is to use tech for good and using it to drive equitable growth and national progress in all fields. With that said, in this room are the people who will have the lead role in our brave new world. Government must play a supporting role. We will work to create an environment which will enable you to lead the mission of digital inclusion. This is the opposite of what government usually does, which is to be a digital contrabida. Government must refrain from using technology to wring more taxes that are unnecessary from our citizens' pockets. It must use tech to tap their talents and unleash their fullest potentials. Thus, as chair of the Senate Committee on Public Services, I once again seek your insight and support. Help us digital immigrants in modernizing our analog legislation and in building a legal firewall that will not strangle innovation. In fact, we have already installed the basic programming. We recently amended the archaic Public Service Act, thereby opening the economy to more players. To this operating system, we are planning to add other updates. First, we have the Open Access in Internet Act, which will simplify the registration process for internet service providers. And good news to you also that you don't have to seek congressional approval if you're an internet service provider. Second, the Better Internet Act, which seeks to set a minimum standard for internet connection, as well as require ISPs to expand to underserved and unserved areas. Third, we filed the E-Government Services Act, which mandates the use of information and communication technology to enhance the delivery of government services. This will facilitate the exchange of data between government agencies and make frontline services such as paying the BIR, Pag-ibig, into one basic application as opposed to going to different government websites. Lastly, I filed the Critical Information Infrastructure Protection. If passed, the Act will provide a framework for ensuring the security and reliability of the country's digital ecosystem. For example, critical infrastructures like government offices, media, big media companies should have a trained cybersecurity officer or somebody or an actual cybersecurity officer on duty. And speaking of digital firewalls, let me talk about the little agency that could, the Cybercrime Investigation Coordinating Center, or the CICC, under the DICT. The CICC is a small fish in a big pond. Their 320 million proposed budget, which has zero confidential fund, is a drop in the You find that amusing, isn't it? It's a drop in the government coffers. They have a staff complement of only 53 individuals, one of whom is the only certified Chief Information Security Officer in the entire government. She's also a she was or is an ethical hacker. And yet this small agency is leading the fight, is leading the fight against cyber criminals. Just last year, they helped arrest 3 members of a foreign terrorist group that's wanted all over the world, but they found them. They raided recently a cyber scam den, which netted 800 computers, 2,000 mobile phones, and thousands of pre-registered SIM cards with more than 1 billion pesos in load, which goes to show even a few good and competent people can do a lot of good in this world. We will work on giving this agency what they need to succeed. So in conclusion, I believe that we can build the digital infrastructure needed for tech for good and its 4 pillars: tech which is responsible, tech which is supportive, tech which facilitates, and lastly, that is transformative, which solves complex social problems and which helps build a kinder and more inclusive world, both online and offline. Thank you, and good morning to all.
Maraming salamat po, Senator Grace po. Once again, let's give a big round of applause to Senator po. Marami pong salamat. And thank you for being championing, of course, digital evolution in the Senate. Marami pong salamat. We'll have again Senator Paul later in our panel discussion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to present the findings of TFGI study, we will have Mr. Keith Detros, the program lead of the Tech for Good Institute. Mr. Detros leverages almost a decade of experience in government affairs, evidence-based policy research, and stakeholder engagement to work on areas at the nexus of technology and public policy. He previously served as a digital economy specialist at the U.S. Department of State's Embassy in Manila, where he covered entrepreneurship, innovation, technology policy, and cybersecurity. To present the findings of the TFGI study, please give a big round of applause to Mr. Keith Detros.
Good morning. And thank you, Diane, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Senator Po, Anton, Grace, Dr. Kang, Ming, and all our distinguished guests from both the public and the private sector. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Again, I am the program lead for the Tech for Good Institute. And today, I have the pleasure of sharing with you the findings of our research study conducted across 6 countries in Southeast Asia. My presentation today will serve as a scene setter to our much-awaited panel discussion between the public and the private representatives in the room. In the next 15 minutes, I try to answer one question, which is how do countries in the region envision the next phase of digital transformation? How do they see the role of technology and the digital economy in enabling this kind of growth? So just as a background, this study was funded by the Singapore government through the IMDA, or Infocom Media Development Authority, and we conducted the 6 in-country roundtables in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And in the Philippines, we are thankful again to our partner, AIM, Dr. Kang and Jamu. We did the roundtable here in February, and I see some familiar faces in the room. Thank you so much for your inputs. And these are the results 6 months later of that study. So as our speakers before me has already mentioned, Southeast Asia's digital economy growth is one of its defining trends, or the defining trend in our region today. The Philippines has been one of the fastest growing digital economies. And as Senator Grace Poe mentioned, we have been increasing in terms of gross merchandise value as well as digital transactions. And the Philippine government is recognizing the potential that it brings. In the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, a strategy framework was included where it identified key sectors in digital economy growth, which includes e-commerce, fintech, platform economies, and gig economy. And across the region, governments are similarly prioritizing these things, while Southeast Asia is often regarded as one market, we found two common priorities across the 6 countries. First, everybody is trying to digitalize public services and government. They saw the pandemic as this opportunity to harness these technological solutions and make it more efficient for people to access public services. And second, there's the digital pivot. Countries in Southeast Asia is recognizing the role of key sectors and industries, including MSMEs, in their economic journey. There are also common enablers that were identified by these 6 countries. First, they said, developing infrastructure is vital. Of course, these are foundational in terms of the digital economy. Second, building digital literacy. Third, growing the digital talent and developing it more. Fourth, fostering trust in the digital ecosystem. Fifth, encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship. And sixth is the understanding and recognition that regional cooperation is vital. These are not surprising, but it pays to validate this with roundtable discussions across Southeast Asia. And I'm sure you've heard all these before. But there was another sentiment that perhaps is gaining traction. In our conversations, we've continually been hearing that economic value is crucial. It is important, but it is not enough. We are seeing the impacts, both unintended consequences and key challenges that are currently emerging in the digital economy. And stakeholders mentioned the threats or the risks such as digital divide, cybersecurity, workforce disruptions, personal data loss or personal data breaches, threats to the social fabric, and environmental impact. And we have some ways of achieving this baseline, responsible, and sustainable digitalization. Actually, in another study that we conducted, we studied almost 400 digital economy companies in Southeast Asia. And while a lot of them, 85% of them, mentioned that they want to do good, almost half of them only have actual initiatives to do good. And then almost a quarter of them have the reporting that they've set this as clear metrics and clear targets. What this tells us is there's opportunity to align that intention that leads to action. And Senator Poe actually already mentioned or touched upon some of the key things that this, or how can we go about these things. So how can technology lead to social good? We already mentioned about the baseline, responsible tech, which is just doing no harm. But technology can also be supportive and actively preventing harms. For example, if you logged into your emails right now, Google actually uses AI and blocks around 10 million spam and phishing emails. And the same sensors that are predictive in nature are helping us in weather patterns. And I remember in 2020 when the Taal volcano was erupting, technology was also very vital in evacuating and informing those people in the danger zone, around 370,000 of them, to safety. Next, technology can also be facilitative in nature. This is perhaps the most common use case for digitalization. This is to streamline the process, save time, increase access, or lower cost. Digital financial services, we have Mint here, GCash, as well as Grab for GrabPay. In the room today, this is part of a solution of being a facilitative tech that enhances the financial inclusion for the unbanked and underbanked. In another report by the Tech for Good Institute, 70% of digital lending users had previously been unable to secure financing from banks and other lenders, and these are because of multitude of factors. I know in the Philippines it can be because of voluminous requirements to be able to access this financing, but digital financial services and payment services have increased efficiency in that manner and allowed access to financial services for the Filipinos. And finally, even more ambitious though, is the transformative tech, where innovation can help solve problems. And this requires new ways of thinking. For example, if we do carbon markets, we need to understand or use technology like LiDAR sensors so that we can trust the data that is being input into the carbon markets, and that carbon stock monitoring technologies in forests can help us estimate the yield and the generation of carbon credits. So these are just several ways of how tech can deliver impact beyond economic growth. And towards this, as we talk about this in Southeast Asia across the economies, the ambition, again, the question was, how does the people envision the next phase of growth? The ambition for technology has also broadened. And it can be classified into two pillars: encouraging innovation, and second is fostering a confident digital society. And here, innovation now is not just necessarily about technology innovation, how fast it moves or develops, but also business innovation for business models and policy innovation for governance models. There is a clamor, an appetite for all tech, business, and policy innovation to be interconnected. And while initially digital transformation agenda is towards fostering trust in the digital ecosystem, it has now broadened into governance of emerging technologies. Jamu already mentioned AI, and there's clear and a very clear message from our stakeholders that said that there needs to be a collaborative and proactive manner in which government stakeholders and the public sector and the academe should work together on how we can govern emerging technologies such as AI. And just from encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship, it has also broadened a higher level to impact investment and innovation. These are supporting startups and the digital ecosystem with purpose in their mission. Finally, more than strengthening the regional cooperation, there's also the request or even the aspiration for a coordinated and responsive regulatory environment. It's not just about the public and the private sector, but also the public and the public coordination between and among government agencies that is important. But as innovation is one of their aspects, innovation must serve society. Leads us to our second pillar. Now it's not merely about developing the digital infrastructure, but after we lay down all our cables as well as towers, stakeholders are mentioning that also discussion should move towards affordable and quality access. It looks beyond simple connectivity infrastructure, but enabling that first it is reliable as well. It is fast, that we can do things while we are connecting to the internet. Second, building the digital literacy was also important for our stakeholders. But at the same time, what does it mean to have meaningful and productive participation in the digital economy? It means, are we just using it for leisure, doom scrolling, or are we also equipping the youth especially, with the necessary tools and awareness to be able to use digital technologies in a more productive manner, maybe learning, maybe start a new business. And at the same time, more than just growing the digital talent, it means sustainable and adaptive livelihoods. Technology now has lengthened actually our productive years, to say the least. Technology would be able to help us do some gig work, and also be able to do other methods or other jobs that we were used to do. It also allows us to be reskilled and upskilled, to transition into different sectors that we did not consider before. How do we use technology so that it's not just growing the digital talent, but it leads to sustainable and adaptive livelihoods? This is the trend that we are seeing in terms of discussion in the digital economy. It is more than economic growth, but now there's clamor for sustainable development. I end with this slide. for digital economic outcomes for the Philippines. These are the results of what are the aspirations of the Philippine stakeholders for the digital economy. Quality connectivity for all segments, especially we recognize our 7,000 islands, rural, and especially the far-flung areas still need quality. And I remember they mentioned, they really inserted the word quality connectivity in there. Second, they wanted the meaningful and productive participation. Our stakeholders in our roundtable discussion in the Philippines mentioned that they want digital literacy and capacity building campaigns. Third, to foster a confident digital society, protecting the users through cybersecurity initiatives and data protection programs will be critical to earning their trust. Next is evidence-based policy research and consultations should be made available for policy making. These were also the insights of the think tanks and the academe, that there are research available that can help inform the laws and legislations that we have. And finally, a responsive and multi-stakeholder support is needed to drive innovation. There were government representatives, the public sector, private sector representatives, as well as civil society organizations in the roundtable, and all of them are all in agreement that they can't do this alone. The collaboration, co-creation, and the cooperation of each other in the room is needed. This is just one of the, the top line findings of the Tech for Good Institute's research. I invite you, this is an invitation to a conversation for feedback, for any comments to our research. And I'm holding you up for our most esteemed panel. So I thank you very much and I hope you took away some key and insightful thoughts from our research. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Keith Dethros. Mr. Keith indeed presented valuable information and data that we could take advantage of, make use of, in order for us to really have the transition from tech for growth to tech for good. He mentioned that economic value is crucial, but it is not enough. Now, from that research presentation, we move on to this dialogue, the panel discussion, from process to progress, unlocking quality digital economy growth in the Philippines. With the Philippines exhibiting great potential in the digital economy, there is an opportunity for the country to leverage technology and tech-enabled business to deliver inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth. How can the Philippines achieve quality digital economy growth while ensuring that the digital ecosystem is resilient and safe for all? The panel will focus on identifying relevant, timely, and actionable policy recommendations that will broaden the desired outcomes for the digital economy from tech for growth to tech for good. Today, we are honored to have such a distinguished panel to discuss an important topic that concerns the development of the Philippines' digital economy. May I invite the panelists please to take their seats. First up, of course, we welcome Senator Grace Poe of the Senate of the Philippines to kindly please be here in front. Followed by Mr. John Rubio, Country Director, Meta Philippines. Ms. Grace Vera Cruz, Country Head, Grab Philippines. Mr. Winsley Bangit, Vice President of New Businesses, Mint. Mr. Prim Paipon, Executive Director, AIM Dado Banatao Incubator. And last but definitely not the least, we have Dr. Ming Tan, Founding Executive Director of TFGI, to moderate the panel discussion. Let's give them please a big round of applause. I will now turn you over to Dr. Ming Tan to moderate the panel.
Thank you very much. I think Diane has given a great introduction to each individual here. You know, we have obviously Senator Poe, who needs no introduction, John from Meta, and I think it's wonderful that we have a global organization on our panel. We have Grace here, two Graces, from a regional tech company, Grab. And then we have obviously Winsley from Mint and GCash, as well as Prim from the ecosystem building perspective. So thank you, everybody. As Key's presentation showed, where there are areas of common priority across Southeast Asia, they are expressed slightly differently or sometimes quite differently in each country. So as an opening question, I'd like to ask each panelist to draw upon his or her unique perspective and experience. Is there an area, or if I dare say, a grand challenge that requires the most urgent focus in the Philippines in order for tech and tech-enabled businesses to advance quality digital economy growth? Maybe I'll let Senator Poe start, and then we can go down the line. Mr. Mike.
I think from our observation, the biggest challenge for us is really internet connectivity. I mean, we've seen that, as I've mentioned, more than 80% of households don't have a stable internet connection or an internet connectivity at all. We should also improve on the connection between government and the private sector when it comes to digitalization. I think that if government is able to digitalize most of its services, it will be more transparent as well as more effective in quickly addressing the needs of the public. So those are the two challenges, I think: internet connectivity and the connection of the government with the private sector through digitalization.
Thank you so much, Senator Poe. John?
For me, I definitely echo what Senator Poe just mentioned. It's kind of ironic, like when you look at, for example, our platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, Philippines is one of the leading users of these platforms globally. When you look at the time spent on it, we're again one of the top globally. But then when you look at the connectivity and the amount of people, whether it's in rural areas, Senator Poe and the study already highlighted, the type of access is not just about can you connect, but what is the quality of that connection? And as you get into more complex usage, whether it's, driving more business, whether it's doing things like remote education, remote governance, the more you move into these types of, digitally enabled services, processes, you really need that connectivity. And I think solving that allows us to then overlay all the tech for good things that become available because now everyone has that quality access.
Right, the baseline enabler is the connectivity. Grace, Senator Poe mentioned connection between government and the private sector, and both Grab as well as GCash had a unique opportunity to work together with the government during the pandemic in different ways as well. So what would you say is the one area or a grand challenge that really is urgent?
For us, I saw it firsthand, the ease of doing business. Senator Grace Poe touched upon it. And actually a lot of government partners recognize that fact. One of our venture capitalist friends was here and we were having dinner and said, why is there only very few startups in the Philippines? Why are there very few Filipino founders? And one of the things we agreed on as a conclusion to that, or as an answer to that question, is it's so hard to do business here. Of all the countries in Southeast Asia that at least he invests in, the Philippines has probably the most requirements. So maybe I'll give an example. Even for TNVS, the Grab car, to be able to get a Grab car, a driver or an entrepreneur has to have a bank account, a physical bank account with 30,000 pesos. They have to publish the fact that they are going into TNVS in a publication, in a newspaper. So they have to be in that list. They used to have to get a certificate of conformity from the banks to say that they are a vehicle for public use. None of these are required in other countries for TNBS. So it's something that we work with our government partners in. Just a small example of how it's infinitely more difficult sometimes to do business here or to start your own business. So that's something I think that we can work with Senator and all our other public officials.
Who is requiring this, LTFRB?
Yes.
I'm going to hold that thought on the ease of doing business because I'm sure Prim will have something to say about that. But maybe we'll let Winsley have a go at, highlighting a grand challenge for the
Yep, yep.
Philippines.
So actually, the quality of digital development is really very close to our heart. GCash is a proud Filipino tech company, and financial inclusion, finance for all, is our main vision. And again, advancing digital development, I believe, can be dimensionalized in a couple of ways. One is there should be fair access to platform and technologies, right? So, for example, when I say fair access, we should be able to, the challenge is to be able to lower that friction of onboarding. So it can be in the form of education, like we've said, diba? Are people equipped to handle this new digital tool? And a live example for us is when it comes to onboarding, digital formal documentations, for example, like a formal ID, is required for you to participate. And if you want to be inclusive, people in the far-flung provinces who don't have formal documents won't have that fair chance to onboard and participate in digital services. Another aspect of which is a ubiquitous utility. So meaning for the economy to really understand the impact, there should be broad-based implications. So in the case of GCash, we won't be able to grow merchants, digital merchants, if users are not growing. Users will not grow if the sources of income are not digitally enabled, right? So we should be able to enable an ecosystem. Admittedly, it is a network. It is a huge network. It is a huge undertaking together with private, public sector to create that environment wherein those various pieces of the network are working together, enabled by digital, so that there's a broad-based ubiquitous impact.
Thank you so much. I think, Prim, I'm going to ask you to bring up this line, but a couple of things that have been brought up already, I think you will have, very sort of close experience with the question about ease of doing business. How do you build an ecosystem where it's cross-disciplinary, people who are coming from different sectors, but all very important in that ecosystem? As executive director of AIM, Dado Banato Incubator, you're doing this every day. So what would you think is the sort of key urgent challenge?
I think in the course of 5 years running the AMDBI, we, the partners, stakeholders, and startup founders at the AMDBI have actually concluded that digital economy is actually consists of digital assets. And digital assets have to be defined like how we define a genetic blueprint. Meaning the digital asset composition that defines the Philippines is totally different from how Malaysians define theirs. As a response to that, 5 years ago, before we reopened AMDBI, we actually sat down with successful and failed startup founders, enablers, and investors. We only wanted one question to be answered. What would make a Philippine-based startup be investment ready? And interestingly, we got a very insightful collective answer, which is very short. The challenge for us was to actually build a Filipino thinking incubator built for Filipino entrepreneurial mindset. Not something copied, but literally culturally grown. And I think that's very important because while we currently have a lot of built incubators in the Philippines, over the course of 4 years, we also saw the drop of curiosity and appetite among our stakeholders to create tangible, sustainable, technology-based startups. There are a lot of incubators in the Philippines, but you'll also realize that there are less than 10% applicants in the course of 3 to 4 years. And I guess as a response to that challenge that we learned from our various stakeholders, we realized probably there was a way to create a nation-building platform where technology, innovation, and enterprise can create a Filipino startup that might help concretely contribute to what we call total human economic development. This time around, startups are not used for fanfare of technologies and speakers for forum. This time around, we treat startup founders as problem solvers, economic enablers, and above all, nation builders. And I think at AMDBI, we always remind ourselves, if we can only create more Filipino incubators for Filipino startups and entrepreneurs, we might be able to unlock our biggest untapped potential. And that is to service technologies and products to Asian countries or other countries that only Filipinos can build and design.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I think, Prim, when what I heard you saying is that there is such immense potential, right? Both from a market perspective, but also from a creator perspective. And I'm well reminded, every country talks about there being a talent gap. But actually, there's another way to think about it. It's not a talent gap. The talent is there. It's a skills gap, or it's an opportunity gap, right? Because once you think about it as a skills gap, that's a solvable problem. Talent gap is, you're either born with talent or you're not born with talent. But if it's a skills gap or an opportunity gap, that's a solvable problem. Maybe let me just pick up on one point, because we've all sort of alluded to it, about how technology is actually intimately changing the way that we live. You described what a modern date looks like, Senator Poe, right? Sorry, I'm married, so I don't know, is it swipe left or swipe right? And then I buy the dress, and then, and then I order the food, and then I pay for the food. The Philippines is the social media capital of the world. Filipino netizens spend an average of 21.5 hours a week. That's a full day a week that we spend online. Yeah, and if any of you have teenagers like me, it's probably more. And furthermore, I think very, very powerfully for the Philippines, they're young. The average internet users is 23 years old. 6 out of 10 social media users are below the age of 24. And John, across your different platforms at Meta, you're probably seeing a little bit of variation across the platforms, but hopefully this resonates with you. So my question is, social media has sometimes been been put in the spotlight in terms of both the unintended consequences of the use of social media. But how would you see social media, including all the platforms that Meta has, to be able to deliver the positive impact for the Philippines?
No, thank you. I think if I look at talking about two specific areas, I think there's around economic enablement, and then the second is community building. So when I talk about economic enablement, it's the equalization of opportunity for every single Filipino to become their own entrepreneur, to be able to sell something, to be able to create, and be able to monetize that. So I think when we look at it from a good perspective, one of the first things we need to do is just make sure everybody has the ability to be able to earn a living, to pursue whatever is their passion, to be able to survive. And I think our platforms opens that up to every single individual. What I mean by that is, in the traditional sense, when you want to produce something, you have to set up a company, there's a lot of capital involved. You then have to think about how you market to different people. And that complexity is usually reserved for really big companies because they have enough capital, they have enough people to be able to deliver and overcome all of those hurdles. I think what technology enables is that even if you're an individual, you're almost equal with a large company. You have the same market, you have the same ability. Let me just give an example of what I mean by that. Over the pandemic, we have stats that about 80% of small and medium-sized businesses survived by being able to move to digital platforms where they can present their product, for example, over social media. They can then deliver that product using, for example, transport, and pay digitally using, for example, GCash. In Batangas, the lady who helps me with my garden, I remember during the pandemic, I said, "How did you survive?" And what she served as an example was, she said, "Oh, I know I couldn't go to my clients anymore, but what I did was I started showing plants online. And you've heard the plantitos and titas started buying stuff." She said, "I would go on Facebook and live show my product and say, I'm selling this, for example, fiddle leaf fig." And then she was like, then she would have it delivered and she would get the payment. She said that's how she survived. And it was interesting because I said, can you do some work for me? She said, my business is now doing so well that she's not doing anymore her old style. So I think the first thing is this equalization of opportunity for every single person. So you could be, you may make the best cookies. You're in Cebu and you're the best rattan producer. You're in Ifugao and you're the best weaver. You're now equal with an opportunity, not just to sell in the Philippines, but all across the globe. I think that's the first one around commerce. I think the second is around community. And what I mean by community is once everyone has access, people talk about social media in a very passive way to say, hey, are people just actually watching? What we've actually seen is people are engaged in groups, doing things like educating themselves, old mothers helping educate new mothers how to become a good parent. We have, for example, people who want to learn about things. Let's say someone in Mindanao, a young boy dreams of becoming, let's say, a pilot in the future. There's a significant opportunity to use technology to enable that boy to learn, whether it's in groups, whether it's in digital education, whether it's in accessing information that might not be in a traditional school, but for him to learn about how to become a pilot, how to fly, how to become an engineer. So I think there's the great equalization of commerce, and there's the great opportunity for communities to be able to provide digital services, digital education, digital literacy for everybody.
Thank you so much. I want to pick up your question about the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. I think that we really see this, as Keith mentioned, this is a top priority because it's all well and good to develop new digital economy companies which are high growth. But if you don't have the digital pivot for what is 97, 98% of your firms that already exist, then you're just going to increase that digital divide that Senator Poe mentioned. You know, like Facebook, Grab has been many MSMEs' first baby step into the digital economy. And so they might be advertising on Facebook, or they might be, you know, using one of your services, Grace. But I guess the question is, how do we get them to be more than just marketing or just accessing customers and actually digitally transforming their businesses? Can you maybe share some insights on the role of platform companies in the actual full digital transformation of these MSMEs rather than just the marketing side?
We have onboarded about more than maybe 30,000 MSMEs to our platform, especially during the pandemic. But we see brands that have now become household, like Lola Nenas, for example, or 24 Chicken, or Thai Mango. I hope you order from those stores. But they were unknown brands pre-pandemic. And what we provide, apart from access, which John rightfully said, is really some legitimacy. So when they're on the Grab platform, you know that they are registered with a DTI. You know that we actually have trained them in food quality and food safety. You know where your food comes from. So they have receipts. They actually pay their taxes. So that's something that we provide, and because of that, allow them to grow. The other thing is their access to insights. So if you're actually a very entrepreneuring person that has your own restaurants, we give you insights in your merchant app. And if you know how to use that insights, you grow. You grow way, way, way faster than everybody else. And because you now have access to the same users and the same eaters that Jollibee has, you will be able to sell more of your product and hopefully grow your business 100-fold.
Thank you. I feel like we should have reconsidered the lunch menu and put 24 chicken and everything on the menu. I want to just touch on the point about the private sector being a driver of national development. And one big space is in the digital financial services. As Keith mentioned, we found that of the digital lending customers, 70% across Southeast Asia, not just the Philippines, had previously been unable to secure financing, right? Whether it's they didn't have credit, or they didn't have the right documentation, or there just wasn't a bank near them, for example. But I think as Senator Poe said briefly, was that payments is not enough. payments is maybe the first step into using digital financial services. But how do you actually have somebody how can digital financial services foster both a more confident digital society and a more financially inclusive society as well?
So I believe that digital financial services is really a fulcrum for equitable and sustainable development, mainly because we solve a huge problem, which is reducing the complexity and reducing the uncertainty of day-to-day life. So, for example, we have almost 6 million merchants, online and offline sellers. And digital payments, like what the senator said, it's not just about the convenience of making it cashless. There is a very clear utility and impact. So one story that really had an impact on me is that we know this seller. It's a sari-sari store seller, which is along the hiking trails in Tanay. So this is like somewhere in the mountainside, where fortunately there's mobile signal, but we're happy that when we encountered them, they were accepting GCash payments. And we asked, why are you accepting GCash in the middle of nowhere? They mentioned that, you know what, if now that I have GCash, I don't need to go down for half a day to the city center, spend 250 pesos, 300 pesos just to commute, pay my bills, pay my vendors and merchants, because every single day away from my work is a reduction in my daily income or salary. So for me, there's a very, very big utility on productivity. Another implication, of course, is on the uncertainty side. We're in access to fair loans. Fair loans, as we speak, is very hard to come by, especially for those who are undocumented. You don't have credit history, or even if you don't have assets, you don't have anything to collateral with for a loan. With GCash, we have a proprietary algorithm called G-Score. And through your transaction and behavioral history within the app, we're actually able to provide you fair loans. So as we speak, over the last 3 years, we're able to disburse 100 billion worth of loans to more than 3 million individuals who mostly will be undocumented and don't have credit history or even collateral. So no, these are unsecuritized loans. So I guess it's enabling MSMEs and people who will need it, again, to dream bigger for their future. So I guess, again, digital services is at the heart of having broad-based access to technology and uplifting the lives of individuals and communities.
Thank you. I think we had a clarification. The figure, how many loans to undocumented?
Yes, since 2016, 2017, we've released 100 billion pesos, 100 billion pesos worth of loans for GCash. We call it G loans, G credit, to more than 3 million individuals. And again, a broad majority of those are those who don't have credit history, documents, etc.
Thank you. And one thing I want to just pick about that is just a whole way you basically re-looked at what credit means, what a credit score looks like, right? It's not, there's a joke about, most that traditionally getting a loan is really a luxury that's reserved for people who probably don't at least in need of a loan, because the definition of a credit score was whether or not you had collateral. So that's really about whole new ways of thinking. And Prim, maybe I can bring you in. We talked about the incubator, Filipino new ways of thinking that work for the Filipino market. And I want to pick up that sometimes the word innovation ecosystem and startup ecosystem are conflated. Like they think it's the same thing. In my mind, the innovation ecosystem could be bigger than a startup ecosystem because you could have a venture builder with a corporate, you can have an open innovation system with a larger company. You need to have policy innovation and laws as well to be able to advance new ways of thinking that perhaps your laws or your regulations just not equipped to think about it in that way. But the startup ecosystem is absolutely critical to make sure that these new ways of thinking take off and see the light in a way and actually meet the market. Can you share your thoughts on how the incubators that you run empower startup to contribute to new ways of thinking? And perhaps what more might be needed outside of the startup ecosystem, within the innovation ecosystem, that might be needed to make this dream of yours really possible?
Those are two very long questions. I'll start with the first question. I agree that innovation is only a startup is only a subset of innovation, because not all the time innovations need to produce a product or a technology. What at AMDBI we actually do to our startup founders is to always make sure that before they decide to be startup founder, they have to have high levels of innovation. Because innovation is a process, it's also a mindset. We can always work around on new business models, but innovation is something to do with novelty in a person. And I think that's where creativity also in changing times would actually work in. As a response to your second question, our job as an incubator at AMDBI is to actually decentralize opportunities. For the past 3 years at the height of the pandemic, for every 100 congresses, trainings, and workshops dedicated to startups and innovations, almost 98% of them were actually held in Metro Manila. And we're talking of an archipelagic region.
Yeah.
Sure, there were challenges in terms of internet connectivity, but as a stakeholder of technology innovation and entrepreneurship, it's actually our vital role to actually decentralize opportunities. Otherwise, we might not be able to tap their potentials. The most interesting part we actually learned is that 87% of the markets of Manila-based agri-tech startups are actually in the regions. While potential thinking to become startup founders are centralized in Metro Manila, the profits for agri-tech are actually across the regions. And the more we do not recognize the vitality of that data, we might lose the very potential and the market for it. So at the incubator, it's actually our job to discover talents across regions, regardless of platform. It's also vital for us to make sure that all of these big concepts about AI, blockchain, crypto are all simplified. Because at the end of the day, what's the function of a technology when an uneducated, non-tech savvy Filipino farmer is given an agri-tech solution that he or she cannot use? So at AMDBI, it's very important for startup founders that they're actually grounded on how to create fundamentals based on emerging concepts. So currently, we ask our startups always to be a platform of inclusivity, meaning they have to be a platform wherein they invite other players to be inside the platform. Gone are the days that the market direction is B2B. B2C. It's a player right now of B2B, meaning if a startup like AutoServe would actually create a platform, he needs to invite all the independent car repair shops to be in the platform. That way, the startup can actually engage data insighting, a lot of automated operations that might be afforded and given to a lowly car repair owner. We also had all of these concepts at AIM about data science, the emergence of data science. Everyone in big corporations wanted to be part of it. But we also overlooked the very impact that we cannot create a better inclusive economy if we do not also serve the data science and its concepts to the uneducated, overlooked sector. So one of our startups, which happens to be the first educational technology that offers data science upskilling, created a program for TESDA. Just imagine, TESDA, data science upskilling in one concept. And I think that's our job, to actually simplify the big concepts given by technology and make sure that when you talk of inclusive developmental technology, it serves everyone in the economy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love what you mentioned, that it has to be fit for purpose. It doesn't matter. I remember an Israeli professor once said to me, you know, Ming, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, right? The Stone Age ended because we found a better way to do things that made our lives better and easier. But if this innovation ecosystem does work, and as we've seen rapid innovation globally, there's a different challenge. And Senator Poe, let me ask you, when technological innovation is so fast. Not just a half-life of technology is getting shorter and shorter, but the scale of adoption is massive. So the impact of any consequences also massive. I'm reminded that it took 75 years for the telephone to reach 100 million users, right? And it took ChatGPT 2 months to reach 100 million users. And we have Meta here, so I think it took Threads something like 5 days or something to reach 100 million users. So, and we don't know how to govern generative AI, for example. How, from your perspective, how can we balance fostering an enabling environment for innovation and yet manage the risk of emerging technologies for which perhaps the full consequences are really not known, but the scale of adoption is so massive and so fast? Can you maybe offer some thoughts on that?
Before I answer your question,
Yeah.
you mind if I react to Grace's report earlier about the ridiculous requirements being asked of the Grab drivers from LTFRB, by LTFRB. Unfortunately, this is something that we didn't discuss in our hearings. They do these things. This is really the problem. Sometimes we legislate, then they do the implementing rules and regulations, and then it somehow changes the spirit of the law. But I'm glad you brought it up because I will certainly want them to justify why they're asking that. But to give you an example about the changes in technology and how the government is trying to catch up. As you know, we're always delayed, right? Because it's also very difficult to find the right balance to legislate something and not stifle innovation. What happened, just to give you an example that we are trying to cope, during the pandemic, when we passed the Bayanihan, We Recover as One Act, there were a lot of provisions there giving subsidies to small businesses, giving assistance to the marginalized, etc. But unknown to many, part of it is also suspending permits for those who would be building telco towers. The only permit that they needed to get out of the many number of permits that they needed to secure in the past was the height permit, which is understandable if it's close to the airport, etc. And because of that, from 2020, when we passed our bill, so there was a suspension of 3 years, no permits except for the height requirement, from about 7,000 cell towers. From 2020 to 2021, they were able to build close to 37,000 cell towers in just a span of 1 year because of the regulation. So we understand the crucial role government plays in really understanding the importance of the stakeholders in businesses. Another also important thing to remember, I'm sorry if I digress, but I feel that this is also quite pertinent to the topic of government playing catch-up. Of course, before it was quite unknown that people use motorcycles as taxis, right? Our land transportation code is so archaic that we still have provisions on horse-drawn carriages. So now we have a bill on the motorcycle for hire to legalize this service to the public. Now, what does that include? That includes, of course, protection to the riders as well as the passengers, to make sure that the riders and the company has the proper insurance. And I'd like to really commend, in fact, Angkas for initiating this because of the example of George Royeka. There's a standard that is being followed now that they have to have a good safety record. And Grab, I know also you had one of your representatives, I call him Mr. Yu, but I guess his name is what, Yu Ming? Yu Hem Lim. When he was here also, he assured us because I think Grab was able to buy into Move It, right? So now you'll be in that pilot testing. So these are the things that we really need to be able to update in our legislation. And I'm not sure if you've read it somewhere, but apparently an Angkas driver makes 40,000 pesos a month, which is quite substantial in comparison to what a normal employee would make. So this is also driven by technology. So that's one. And then with regards to your next question, how about this thing that of the
Balancing,
unknown, right?
yeah.
How to balance it? Well, somebody once said that every man is given a key to the gates of heaven, and the same key is used to open the gates of hell, right? So to balance both, you have the good part of social media and also the internet, innovation, livelihood, transparency, information. But on the other side, you have human trafficking. You know, the Philippines is by the way, this is really quite shocking. In our hearing, we heard that the Philippines is number 2 in terms of computer illiteracy. And to think we know all these social media platforms, right? But number 1 in computer illiteracy, so worksheets, etc. And number 2 in terms of online sexual child abuse. So this is quite alarming. That's why we also have many different laws that we are putting in place to protect those of us that may be victimized. For example, we do a lot of online financial transactions, but the actual protection of that for clients, sometimes if we report it to a bank, it takes forever before our accounts are credited back, unlike in other countries where it's quite fast. But so we have the e-wallets bill that's still pending with the new chairman of the Committee on Banks. And that will punish like phishing, spoofing, and then it will also give customers a place for their redress and compel the financial institutions to act within a certain number of days. Okay, that's one. Number 2 is the SIM Registration Act, which already passed. And I will give you another example of how the intent of the law is sometimes not exactly implemented because of the implementing rules and regulations. So we made this law which will punish those that will fraudulently register. So there are steps on how you should register. Of course, we did not include in the law the steps on how to register because these may change in time. So we left it to the NTC. During the technical working group, one telco company objected to having a live selfie. And that's why we have a gorilla that was able to register with a picture, okay? Because of that one particular provision. In fact, we wanted to put it in the law, but we said it might be a little too restrictive if it's not vetted, and if times change, there might be a better process. But then the last word was they were going to include it, but this one company did not want it there. So now, what are we going to do? They have to now review all the ones that have registered. So now NTC came up with a new implementing rules and regulations to require the live selfie for the SIM registration. So we are really trying to play catch up.
Thank you so much. And you know, a couple of things I pick up from that. Number one is, what's either the outcomes that regulations are supposed to intend, or what are the principles, as opposed to having very prescriptive regulations, that, let's always keep our mind on what the outcomes are or what the principles are. And then the second is about the implementation challenges. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen until it's implemented. And then the third is the quote unquote archaic acts. I love your example of the horse-drawn carriage. And I think we see this, well, the Philippines has had a data protection law for over 10 years already. And just this year, they are issuing new circulars. But at the same time, Indonesia and Vietnam only instituted its acts in last year. So we really see how different countries are moving in different directions. Quickly building off Senator Poe's comments, may I invite comments from the speaker? If there was one priority policy area, whether it's about reviewing implementation or about the reviewing from an archaic act perspective, or maybe even from a coordination. There are too many agencies involved. And this is not directed at Senator Poe. This is for discussion, because we are collectively looking at what is needed for Philippines. What would be one policy area that you think would really help Philippines move from tech for growth to tech for good? Maybe I'll start from Prim and move back.
I guess in 2019, the president already signed the Innovation Startup Act, and it got everyone very excited in the ecosystem. Startup founders, incubators, and enablers. But as what was mentioned earlier by Senator Po, to actually sign something into an act and to implement it are actually two different things. So we're still waiting for the full enactment of the act through the Philippine Startup Development Program. Why is that very, very important for us? One, Philippines is a highly archipelagic country. That Philippine Startup Development Program would actually provide access to capital funding. It would also create certain tax incentives breaks, depending on economic zones, but it would also create so much capacity buildings and programs across the regions. And we're actually waiting for the full enactment. But I think at AMDBI, we're also recognizing the very efforts of the government in terms for the past 3 years of inviting some of our startups or currently industry experts. So a lot of our AI, agri-tech, government tech, and even fintech startups are actually sitting in different government agency-led council meetings. And we like that idea because that collaboration might actually generate, as what was mentioned earlier by Senator Po, more prescriptive than restrictive. So take, for example, for the past years, the Philippine Blockchain Week only features big corporations. But 2 days ago, when they were actually doing the national conference, interestingly, 3 of our startups were actually the featured speakers there. So I guess times have changed. We like the idea that big national government agencies are giving special seats for little players called startup founders and incubators.
Thank you so much. Winsley, what's one area that you think should be an area of policy focus, either from an implementation challenge, from a policy, or archaic acts, or something about helping government,
So maybe from a
economy grow?
policy, again, as mentioned by Senator Grace, we've been working closely with the government on a handful of policies. For example, the Digital Payments Act. Digital Payments Act. Another one is the Anti-Financial Account Scamming Act, or AFASA. That's the Anti-Mule Act. Yes. And we're working closely with the CICC and the ICT on that one. But again, not to add anything more to that stack. But as GCash, we really want to make sure that we enable Filipinos everywhere or anywhere, right? And one thing that we think is still underserved when it comes to progressive regulation are the OFWs. There are 10 million Filipinos abroad, 2 million of which are migrant workers. Policies on cross-border finances are still being discussed and developed. Definitely at the BSP level, they're very progressive in really taking in and learning this discussion, may it be from a wealth management point of view, insurance, and I think there's a lot of things to navigate on that area, but definitely it's something that we want to shed light on as really one of the remaining underserved sectors and will benefit from cross-border finance.
I think beyond cross-border finance, it's also cross-border data flows in general.
Yes.
And this is where you need the governments, because this is a G2G conversation, right? That can really, Grace?
Tax reform.
Huh?
Tax reform.
Tax reform.
Yeah, I think that there's so many different taxes in so many different levels. There's the LGU tax, there's the big corporate tax, small government tax. Like people are talking about taxing drivers and delivery partners, gig economy workers. No? And I think that it's something that we must be quite very thoughtful about, because on the one hand, there's poverty alleviation that we have to do to get people to the middle class. And on the other hand, like we do need to support government services, and that's something that we're very conscious of. So like I hope that we think about new business models, platforms, like how they work, and really tax correctly, I think at all levels.
Thank you. John?
I think for me, it's related to the example I gave earlier around economic access, particularly for small entrepreneurs. So the Internet Transactions Act, as Senator Paul talked about, there is a great balance between having to manage what is potentially bad. So for example, fraud, making sure you have good customer protection, but at the same time, making sure that as it gets implemented, similar to Grace's example earlier, that the restrictions don't become so complex that a small entrepreneur won't be able to compete anymore because there are, let's say, complex requirements around, let's say, merchant onboarding or, for example, tax reporting and so forth. So I think that really excited about it being able to provide consumer protection for all the commerce that's going to happen digitally, but then making sure that as it gets implemented, that we make sure that we protect small and medium-sized entrepreneurs by not making it too complex or too restrictive, while at the same time making sure that we manage the potential bad that could happen.
Thank you. Senator Poe, do you have a pet area? No, I've got one. We'll have some questions.
Well, okay, I've heard all your wish lists. Well, those are also my wish lists, actually. But you know, government has many heads, and each senator is a republic in itself, right? But for me in particular, I know how difficult it is with our tax codes. I've seen that, and I know also the problem with money mules. That's why we have this e-wallet bill that's pending. And then, of course, there are many different legislations that I can still really push for. Hopefully, I have enough time. It takes so long to debate on the floor. Well, unless you're in the lower house, that will be like 5 minutes. You're done debating. But if you debate at all, but wait, what am I gonna say again? Oh, what would I like to pass? I would like really to push for the e-government act, because I really think that this will probably synthesize a lot of different government services, make it less redundant, make it standardized, because there are some agencies that have very difficult navigation tools to be able to access their services. And it will also, in a way, indirectly uphold the freedom of information, because it will never be legislated, at least now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, do
No,
you want to?
that's it.
Oh, thank you so much. We're running a little bit behind time, and I know I'm standing between you and lunch, but if you could just give us a couple, maybe we run 5 minutes over, because I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So perhaps in the interest of time, we'll take 3 questions directly from the floor, and then I'll invite any of the panel to answer any one of those 3 if they're interested. Are there any questions? No? Maybe I'll just pose one quick one. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the theme for I'm Lawrence from Business Fair. The theme for this discussion is unlocking quality digital economy in the Philippines, right? I want to know if the Philippines has a chance to become like a hotspot for the digital economy in the region. Is that something that's part of the research that you've done at Tech for Good?
Well, for us, that would be an outcome, right? And what does a hotspot mean? Is it that you're a wonderful incubator? Are you a wonderful test market where things are prototyped? Are you where the funding grows? Is that where the talent comes from? There's many different definitions. Maybe I'll ask any of the panel.
So just a quick one for me, because I think on our platforms, one of the things that I'm really seeing is the ability for anybody to sell anywhere. So what I mean by that is like cross-border trade. And I think this is where the Filipino has an advantage. I'm a
Yeah.
true believer on the entrepreneurial spirit of the Filipino.
Yeah.
I look at it obviously biased, but I think we're better than any, like when you look at Southeast Asia, our ability for like a small, nanay or someone in the province to have the best type of product. Again, whether that might be the best batik or something we woven or even just fashion, the Filipino entrepreneur, I think when I see the start of the cross-border flows where someone in Cebu is selling into Malaysia, selling into Indonesia, we're starting to see that. And to your point, I'm really excited about that getting continually unlocked over the next few years because of the Filipino entrepreneurial spirit.
And that's really interesting that, during the pandemic, global trade went down, but intra-ASEAN trade remained was stable. So I think that's, we should be trading more with one another. Any other comments or questions? Okay, quick question from Dr. Kang.
Over the years, one thing I've noticed in the Philippines, whether we're looking at different departments, different government agencies, this is particularly for our senator. We notice very little cooperation, integrated efforts across different departments, different agencies. Everybody's working toward a digital transformation, AI training, sustainability, digital economy. And there are so many different topics that are very, very important for the country, for the region. And everybody's working hard, but they don't talk to each other. They don't want to pool their resources to be able to push forward the agenda. And for me and for AIM, where we can see many different initiatives, I must confess it's very frustrating. I wonder if there's anything that can be done, that is being done to correct it.
So the question was about interagency coordination. And I think some of the companies, within the government. So say DOST working with DTI, working with DICT, for example. And I think if you're a horizontal platform, you really run into some of this. So I don't know whether you want to share the pain or you want to share the, some of your
No, I
thoughts on the
mean,
solution.
No, really, there is a disconnect. I mean, DOTR, for example, a department under my committee, they have the aviation group, they have the marina group, and sometimes they come up with different policies that are not really harmonized. And yes, there should be better communication, but part of it's also leadership. If let's say there is a secretary of a particular department that's a little bit more in tune with what's happening and streamline processes. Unfortunately, again, it'll boil down to leadership and implementation. So I really don't know what to tell you why, without really finding fault exactly and mentioning individuals. So forget that.
Thank you. I want to end on a hopeful note. Because at the end of the day, this is the Tech for Good Institute, and we are an academic institution at AIM, so we have to kind of look forward to the future. So this is a rapid fire round to close off our panel. In one word, perhaps a Filipino word even, what could you share? In one word, what captures your aspiration for the digital future of the Philippines? What would it be? And maybe why? I can either start from there or I can start from here. Whoever might have a thought, or start from Prim and give Senator Poe the last word.
That's a very Miss Universe question. So my answer will be very Miss Universe as well. Thank you very much, Dr. Ming Tan, for that very wonderful question. We have this very beautiful colloquial word in Filipino, which is wais. For learned professionals like us, we call it innovation and technology. But for very ordinary Filipinos, they call it everyday fight for poverty. And wais, inspired by an English word, literally means a person who's actually able to create sound decisions based on first-hand experiences. And I would like to think in a very deeper concept that perhaps our edge, our very defining edge as a digital economy nation is our being wais. But I would like to put a context to that. Probably the invitation is to be a wais in terms of really trying to tap the potentials. Where is this coming from? 83% of the 188 founders at AMDBI are first-time entrepreneurs. 89% of them were not graduates of business school. So technically, 94% of them created technologies and innovations, scaled it up to an enterprise just because they wanted to sell that impact is still sexy and cool. And that speaks volume of us being a thinking nation, that we're literally wise, that perhaps in months to come, we create more platforms and opportunities for all sorts of Filipinos to think of, let me strike this one, working models, accessible, inclusive, and sustainable projects. Just imagine, for these wise Filipinos, very grounded and frugal, they're actually able to create so much wealth and impact, despite the lack of literacy. So imagine how much growth and scale they can achieve if all the sectors and enablers would give them a support.
Thank you.
And I think for me, that's the beauty of being part of this fast-changing digital economy system.
Thank you. That's so inspirational. Winsley, one word that captures your aspiration for a digital future for Philippines.
Thank you. I think that's nice. We want to capture it in one word. And for me, it's confidence. In Filipino, kumpiyansa. So one is confidence in the technology. Because sometimes you tend to be afraid of what you don't know or what's new. So people may not be attuned to availing tools to help themselves, especially if it's new, it's fearful. Am I gonna get scammed here, right? So that's why it's imperative for us to build a trusted and secure system. And this is something that's a top priority for a fintech like GCash. But also, I want them to be confident about the future. In our experience in GCash, 85% of our users belong to the low-income segment. 55% of our users are women. And more than 70% of our users are outside Metro Manila. So you know there are lots of unsaid biases already in that type of situation. Diba? You don't think you don't think you have the right opportunities. You don't think you could reach for your goals as efficiently as you could. So I want them to be confident that now they have the tool to take control of their lives. May it be plan better financial services for them, find bigger and better opportunities, because you know what? Technology is there to help them.
Thank you so much. Grace, we have wise, I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, and confident.
Empowering.
Empowered.
Because we don't want to leave anyone behind. We really want to bring everybody in the journey with us as we go through progress.
Thank you. John?
For me, it was pag-asa. So not the weather. I know it's really because of this volcano smog. But for me, it's about hope. Saying that everyone now has an opportunity because of digital tech and all the services and all the innovations that are happening, that they have hope that they can have a better future where they can build their lives, they can build businesses, they can build community, they can drive education. And I think in the end, it's about giving everyone that hope.
Thank you. Senator Poe for a last word.
I think needs speed.
Speed?
Because speed, bilis.
Mm.
Because a lot of things, we have all these good intentions. There are a lot of good laws that are pending. And I hope that we can pass them, implement them soon. I hope we can increase our internet speed. I hope that we can increase prosperity for all, for inclusion. I hope we can just basically make things faster because it's too slow, really. I believe, and so that's my wish.
Thank you. So here's to a speedy, hopeful, empowering, confident, and wise Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for a brilliant panel. Just going to take a photo.